the Left Behind Communities Levelling Up Northamptonshire plan. And happy to discuss that with members, but the primary reason is because we believe that the actions which were developed in the plan should become business as usual for us as a local authority. We recognise that the plan is a long-term plan. You'll recall that there are 3 elements to it, some short-term elements, medium-term and long-term. We are really in that medium-term and long-term activity now. The report does set out a significant number of achievements. It's always difficult to claim credit for them through the levelling up activity because quite often it's delivered by business as usual teams within the local authority. I'm happy as a preamble to leave it at that point, and I'd like to offer for members to ask any questions, make any comments, to inform our exec member for both the exec discussion but also for feedback to full council. Thank you.
So, councillors.
Good morning and thank you very much. I recognise a lot of the work that's sort of gone on. I did ask last time that this came to this EAP what's changed now, because over the last 30 odd years these have been left behind areas, and just putting money in has helped. For example, the Kingswood big local, and everybody on Kingswood knows the big local team and how they've been able to get funding and things like that. But it was just that, you know, making sure that they don't stay left behind areas. The other concern that was raised in the last couple of weeks was that Health Watch Northamptonshire said that they didn't have confidence in the lapse in some of the work that they were doing because they couldn't see it. And I think it's how do we allay those concerns. Obviously, Health Watch is a county-wide, but have said, you know, with the local area partnerships sort of coming down a bit, will that have an impact on some of the work that's being done? And it's just delaying those fees that have been raised. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, thank you, and thank you, Councillor Buckingham, and thank you for your involvement in some of the workshops that we did at the time as well. So I think we recognised when the scrutiny review was undertaken that the challenges that were seen in those communities had been seen for decades in that sense, and we had to be realistic and pragmatic about would you see demonstrable change immediately within those communities as a result of the levelling up scrutiny review, and we didn't think that we would. Generational changes take a generation for you to start seeing them. I think the benefits that we have seen is that certainly the awareness within the council and within our partners, because we do talk about our left behind communities with our partners, has drastically improved. And when I have conversations with George about economic development and making sure that as we bring investment into Northamptonshire, that the benefits are felt across Northamptonshire, not just in those affluent areas. So how do we use some of that leverage to narrow the gap? On your point about local area partnerships, again, local area partnerships were seen as being an evolutionary thing rather than revolutionary. they are at different stages of development. So I think it's about making sure that we take the learning from those that are more advanced and start working with the chair of the with the chairs of the local area partnerships that perhaps are struggling to get grip and momentum, to enable them to learn from some of that good practice elsewhere. I think there still remains a challenge about within local area partnerships about making sure that there is some funding that flows to them to enable them to invest in some of the ideas that they have in that sense. And if Kerry was here, she would talk about the review of our strategic grant giving to the voluntary sector and how we potentially talk about doing that differently in that sense. So hopefully that answers your 2 points.
Just a quick comeback. I think the local area partnerships at the moment haven't involved the community, the residents in the areas. When will that sort of come in? Is that the next phase, going to that involvement and how that works?
Through you, Chair. So yes, I think what we were always really cognizant of is that our communities will often say we don't want to go to talking shops. So we have to evolve how the local area partnerships work to a point where our communities start attending them, that they feel that there is momentum, they can see action as a result of that, and that requires some working between those public bodies to enable them to understand, well, what is it that we can achieve, how are we going to work together, how do we make things happen. What I would say is, whilst local communities may not have been in the meetings, there are people that attend the meetings who do live and understand the challenges within those communities. So they're not voiceless in there, and the challenges and the plans for the local area partnerships have been shaped by local knowledge, not just by looking at data. And certainly the early steps that we did in developing the local area partnership profiles did identify that actually the data doesn't always tell you the right story, and particularly when you're working on population sizes of 50 to 70,000, you can have hidden populations within that. And that's what some of the early work around our local area partnerships identified and enabled us to get much more granular in what some of those challenges were by cross-referencing what we were doing with the work of parish and town councils, but also charities and voluntary sector organisations that were active in those communities as well.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must admit I'm surprised that the government has told us that we shouldn't use the phrase levelling up. It's the first I'd heard of that. That and some of the other things that I've been puzzled by mean that I'm asking a specific question. How will the new government budget and the announcements either side of it affect our levelling up programme?
Thank you. I wish I could answer that question, Councillor Mercer. We're still waiting for the detail around the budget announcement, so it's starting to filter through, but as you know, it's always, once you see the Blue Book details, that you start to understand some of that. I think from my perspective, when we look at this particular plan, there wasn't any specific dedicated funding put into delivering this plan. It was about how do we use our local authority resources, how do we use our influence, how do we work with our partners, with other anchor institutions to try and move that forward. And that work is definitely carrying on because that's a commitment from ourselves as officers who represent the council on the anchor institutions network to make sure that we still continue to take forward these elements. We obviously have a public health approach as well as a local authority. So Jane Bethay, our Director of Public Health, is very keen that we continue to look at some of those challenges that we have within some of our more deprived communities and thinking about how we make the right sort of investments from that perspective. But I think the devil will be in the detail around the budget announcements 2 weeks ago.
You said you don't have the details yet, and I can fully understand that. Have you got a schedule for when the details will be available?
I personally haven't, and bearing in mind that we were having some budget challenge sessions with the executive yesterday, I think the feedback from our Section 151 officer was actually they're still waiting some of that guidance. It's coming through in sort of waves, if that makes sense. So we haven't yet got a full picture of what the investment announcements were as of yet. And I don't have a particular schedule.
So effectively we don't know what our detailed financial situation will be for the coming year, which makes me puzzled as to how we can do a detailed budget when we don't know what we're going to have.
So budget announcements tend to happen in, or certainly tend to happen in that first week of December, and then we tend to get the final notification just before Christmas. So we're still in line with the normal timelines that we see around budget setting. And it tends to be that whilst everyone else is getting ready for Christmas, our finance team and ourselves as exec officers are trying to understand what the implications are and finalise that for our budget consultations in January, leading up to our February council, where we normally agree the budget for the following year.
So in other words, we've got to wait until roughly Christmas. Okay, well, thank you. That's very helpful.
Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question and a comment in the same area. Well, not same area as Councillor Russell. In relation to absorbing, one of the recommendations, absorbing this work into business as usual and becoming part of what the council does. Just wondering, Chair, finances allowing that, these kind of itemised things in here are more, could be absorbed business as usual across the board, because my concerns when this, whether it's called levelling up or left behind communities, I did question some of the, the formulas, and just again, chairs, it's always the same areas in the rounds, and it's whether there are other communities and other needs across Northamptonshire. So it's just whether the funding allows, or what the work that we're doing specifically for these areas can be across the board. If it's business as usual, it actually becomes the council's business across the board for all our communities, not just these areas. And the only other thing I'd like to say, Chair, is passing a comment from history. I think I was on a lap in, I don't know, 2005 or something like that, and I did acronyms on the areas. I think it was an AOB area that was in some of the AOB areas. I think that was the acronym for Rushton. And one of the things that did happen in the end, as always does, Chair, is as soon as the funding dried up, or the council stepped back to let the communities look after themselves, whichever community group it was, over the years, of course, that's all gone. And it's all dissipated, and it's all back as it was. And so I'm not necessarily saying it's a negative, Chair, but without the money and without the continuation of involvement, it does seem over the years that actually letting back and letting communities take over doesn't tend to work in the last 20 years of the history I've been involved in local government.
Do you want to respond, or shall I?
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor North. I think the points around business as usual and making sure that the benefit is felt across the whole of Northamptonshire, that was always our intention with the Left Behind Communities levelling up work. It was always, yes, we have 3 communities that were identified in a national report as being left behind, but there are other communities that we were surprised didn't make that list. Because we know that they're experiencing close to the same amounts of poverty levels as the communities that did make that list. I think as a public body, it's always our intention to narrow the gaps between our most affluent and our most deprived areas. And that includes the 3 levelling up areas, but also includes those other areas which are struggling as well in that sense. I absolutely understand the challenge which has been seen in communities around public bodies stepping back and trying to facilitate or allow communities to lead in that space. I think we have to be really pragmatic around the position of the country's finances at the moment, that to get the best, we are going to have to work in partnership. And that does mean contributions from communities. It does mean contributions from private businesses. It means bringing together all of the assets, all of the experience that we have in Northamptonshire to address some of those challenges. And that's where the local authority plays a key role as a convener, as a facilitator. That's what our Big 50 plan is about from a local authority perspective. How we make Northamptonshire the best place to live, work and grow by 2050. That's a big ambitious plan which certainly all of us within the corporate leadership team are absolutely behind. We see our role as conveners, facilitators. We can't do everything. We need partners to help us to do that from both the voluntary sector, from communities, from other public bodies and from private businesses as well.
Thank you, and thank you for that. I think, it was just making the kind of reassurance, but just the point, Chair, that we're in it for the long game, as area, not necessarily in relation to, whatever government funding or whatever they call it, because as the point I made, when council step back, whether rightly or wrongly, let communities take over, as I said, it tends not to work. And I think it's just that long game. And I think if we go back to the blueprint, we talked about, community hubs and actually being in the heart of the community. And it's just that kind of reassurance that, although the blueprint has dropped off a bit, that we have still got that as, and I appreciate the Big 50 and the council's corporate plan, Chair, but we are still in there in relation to, staying with all our communities and actually, trying to make a difference for people.
Yeah, I think that we've got the benefit as the unitary of, whereas before it was 5 bodies trying to do the same thing, pretty much doing the same thing but slightly different. Now at least we've got the one body that can do a unified across the whole of Northamptonshire and help everybody. That's why we were interested in views on making it business as usual now, because we've done a lot of hard work getting all the stuff, getting the laps in place. One thing I would ask is that we review the laps terms of reference, because it does seem like 1 or 2 have been not hijacked but influenced by members on there to not necessarily go along the route that they were designed for. They've gone on routes that they would like to see. But with the VCSE grants that we've put forward, they've had a big focus when we've allocated them out on levelling up as well, to make sure that we've got that in the day-to-day with everything else. So, Councillor Buckingham.
Sorry. Coming in there. And I think that David is exactly right in what he says. We've had some really good organisations, community voluntary organisation. Serve were absolutely brilliant in the first years, and it's all about the governance of the structures. They had some real innovators that drove things forward across not just East Northants, but across here in Corby. We had really good VCSE as well as Kettering. And what happens though is that the more money you put in, the less people want to do. if people think they've got to fight for what they want, they will step up, step forward, and try to keep what they've got. So I can see it's a two-way system that if you put too much money in, or you provide too much, then people will say, well, it's being done anyway, you know, their way, rather than taking ownership of their communities. And I think there needs to be a little bit more thought about how you engage with those communities, you know, at a ground level, and get them working. Because communities, when they come together, work really, really well. Thank you.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really surprised at that comment from Councillor Buckingham. I was involved in setting up a community group in the east of Rushton, and as soon as the council withdrew and let the community go on, it was dead within 2 years. The one in west of Rushton, which was set up, that survived for I think about a decade after the council let it float free, then it died. The others didn't last even 2 years. So my experience is very different to Councillor Buckingham's, and I'm afraid a little bit depressing. The problem is that if you rely upon volunteers, when those volunteers get busy with their personal lives and have to step back slightly, somehow you've got to get a new generation of volunteers in, and it just doesn't seem to happen in my experience.
David.
Thank you. Really good points from both of you. And again, I think that's where we have a role as an anchor institution. When you look at the number of people that we employ, when you look at the relationships that we've got with the NHS and the number of people that they employ, when you look at the university, the number of people that they employ and the students that they've got learning with them, when you start adding those numbers together, you end up in the 20, 30,000 people number who we could be trying to find different ways of mobilising and getting behind some of those community issues. I think the point Councillor Buckingham was making is a really good one in the sense that it's not just about money. So one thing that we talked about in the Levelling Up plan was about the council having a role to play in supporting voluntary sector organisations to understand how they make themselves self-sustainable and how we support them to do that. Because if they're relying on local authority money to do that, then we know that when the going gets tough, we have to look at some of those things which are not statutory obligations for us, and that's where the funding stops. So if we can support those organisations to be better at bid writing, to be better at securing other sources of funding, to think about the different ways that they can make their organisations more sustainable, then that's the right role which we need to play as a local authority. And I think there's still work that we need to do in that space. I think it's still a bit of a mixed bag across Northamptonshire. And that's where we talk about the infrastructure organisations and how we work with those. So the bigger voluntary sector organisations, but how they support your mums and tots group, your community group that supports a small rural community over here. So I think absolutely. Our grant giving is being reviewed at this moment in time, and that will hopefully give more surety over multiple years for our voluntary sector organisations. But equally, we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of things like how we support people who are interested in stepping into a space because it's a cause that's close to their heart, to be good at doing that and to have the skills to do that, or to have the right sort of support to enable them to be successful.
Yeah. So.
Thank you, Chairman. Levelling Up, I think, identified problems. The problem I see with business as usual is the acceptance that all is well, which it certainly is not. The latest survey I saw nationally of counties, admittedly judged on a few strange ideas, but where you would want to live and where it's nice to live, 47 counties, we were 43rd. Bedford was bottom, surprisingly, and we're quite close to Bedford. So business as usual seems to sound as if we've got an acceptance that if we just do little bits of levelling up, all will be well. And I think we've got to accept that apart from levelling up the bits that need it, the whole plateau needs to be raised. I'm sorry that's depressing, but I find business as usual worrying.
Yeah, I mean, I accept the point which you're making, Councillor. I think we're not suggesting that everything's rosy by saying it's business as usual, but what we're saying by business as usual is that actually trying to level up communities should be part of our core business. It sits at the heart of our corporate plan. So if I've misportrayed that, and then I apologise for that, but it's about saying, no, actually, it should be our core business because it's not going away, and as a local authority, we have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that every department that is working in those communities thinks about how can we support them to, for want of a better word, level up.
Thank you. I think it was my feeling that the public seeing business as usual will misread that into what we're actually trying to do. That was a concern. Thank you.
Yeah, I think our whole aim is that business as usual for us is that we bring the levelling up areas up, but we bring everybody up as well. So we do go up in the rankings of the favourite places to live, average age of death, education, all of that gets brought up with everybody, not just concentrating, rightly so, for the last couple of years on 3 areas, but we bring, once we get those to a level, we bring everybody up. That's what the bringing it business as usual means for me anyway. Not any other comments or questions? No? Okay, thank you everybody. Appreciated. Right, on to the next item of the agenda, which is the Private Sector Housing Assistance Policy Summary of Changes.
Thank you, Chair.
Is this going to be a long, is this still the...
I'll try and
just be prepared. There's quite a few slides, but they are required because it's a big subject, just to warn you.
Thank you, Chair. And for those of you that don't know me, my name's Amy Plank. I'm the Interim Strategic Lead for Private Sector Housing, and I'm accompanied here today by Alina Pasuri, who's the Disabled Facilities Grant Manager. So this presentation is quite long. I apologise in advance, but there's quite a lot to get through. And I spoke to David before the meeting, and it might be wise to perhaps answer questions after each proposal that we wish to introduce, because there's 10 proposals, 10 changes that we wish to introduce in this new policy. So it perhaps might be wise to answer questions at each stage, if that's okay with you, Chair. Okay, so by way of background information, I'll start by just briefly explaining what a Disabled Facilities Grant is. It's a mandatory grant that the Council has to provide to those elderly, disabled and vulnerable residents that are financially eligible. And we do provide about between 300 and 400 of these per year. And it allows us to provide work such as providing safe access in and out of people's properties, normally by means of a ramp, access to the bedroom, to the living room, to the bathroom, to the kitchen, and we're exploring more assistive technology as well. So it's quite wide in scope, and it does certainly help quite a lot of people. Here's just some pictures of some of the works that we've done over the years: a level access shower, a wall-mounted shower, chair, a specialist bath, and a Closet-mat wash-dry toilets. To continue with where we were at vesting day, obviously we had to be safe and compliant at vesting day, so our first private sector housing policy was brought in just after vesting day in April 2021, and over the last 3 years we've been able to reflect and identify how we can make our policy better and help more people, and we've been able to do this under the regulatory reform order, which gives us the scope to provide more discretionary assistance to more disabled people that need it. Another picture here of a single-storey bedroom level access shower that we provided some years ago. I'll first start then by talking about the discretionary DFGs. So that the mandatory DFGs are capped at £30,000, and currently we are providing a top-up to that of an additional £10,000. So at the moment we can't provide more than £40,000 for any given DFG, but given costs of labour and everything else and materials, we're noticing that more and more cases, certainly for extensions and garage conversions, are coming in over 40,000. Over the last 3 years, we've had 28 cases that have required additional assistance over the threshold, which is why with this new policy we're looking to up the thresholds. The budget last year, which we were allocated from central government, was just over 2.5 million. We received an additional amount in October last year of 223,539, and of that total budget we spent just over 2.3 million. It's quite common, just to explain, each year that we don't always spend the full amount that's allocated to us, and that's purely because of the very nature of the way grants are provided, in that they are long in process. Sometimes they require planning permission, which might take 2 months. So we usually do have some underspend each year, which we request to get carried forward to meet the demands. So the discretionary top-up that was introduced at vesting day was £10,000. As I've said, this helps for those complex cases that come in over the threshold. Any cases that come in over £40,000, the current options are for the applicant is to make the difference themselves, or we ask the housing association to pay if it's a housing association property. On both those occasions, it's very rare that we can get the client or the housing association to pay the additional amount. So the setbacks here that it usually falls on us, and it becomes quite complicated to work out whether we can meet that financial additional amount or not, and usually the answer is no, but on a few exceptional occasions we've been coming to Councillor Vinley and Councillor Rowley to ask for those exceptional one-off payments. So it brings me on to my first proposal. So our first proposal is looking to increase the discretionary top-up from 10,000 to 20,000. We looked at extending it to 30, but given the number of cases that we deal with and the cost of the average works that we've analysed over the last 3 years, we feel 20,000 would be enough. It would certainly help fund the majority of extensions that we provide. At this point, I should talk about Foundations briefly. Foundations is the governing body for disabled facilities grants and home improvement agencies across the country. They actually advise councils look at a top-up of 30,000, but we don't think that's necessary. We think that's probably too much for us in North Northamptonshire, so we recommend a top-up of £20,000. And this table here just illustrates other councils around the immediate surrounding area and wider afield that are also unitary, and it just illustrates what their top-ups are, widening from 10,000 to 70,000. As you can see, West Northamptonshire provide a top-up of 15, and Peterborough offer a top-up of 20. So is there any questions on that point there for the discretionary top-up before I move on to the next proposal? Yes.
Does this cover both private sector housing and housing owned by social landlords?
So I say that again, private sector housing and
housing owned by social landlords?
Yes, it does, yes. It covers all properties except our own council stock.
Right, well, the reason I'm asking this is that at one point there was a system for putting a charge on private sector properties so that when they were subsequently sold, some of the money might be recouped. Does that still exist?
Yes, that does still exist, and I'll come on to that slide later on. We do place land charges on the properties so that we can recover our money should they move house after we've just provided an expensive extension.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you very much. My question was around, so there are a lot of private sector tenants who apply for disabled facility grants. How do you work with the landlord on that? Because, you know, obviously they don't have security of tenure. They could move out within 6 months. So how do you marry those two things together?
There's a slide later on actually that talks about landlord applications. Should we pick it up then, because it might be worth explaining it then, if that's all right, Councillor Buckingham?
All we're looking at is the recommendation for 20,000 or 30,000. Which do we think the top-up should be?
A simple one. I've completely forgotten how the allocations are awarded by the government to each authority, on which formula. And
How many what, sorry?
The allocation. I've just forgotten how it's worked out, because obviously there's massive differences between different authorities.
So they calculate it against the matrix. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, obviously, previously when we were districts and boroughs, the money went to county and then it was passed through to us through the Better Care Fund, but the money now comes straight to us as Northamptonshire Council. Over the last 20 years, the allocation has stayed the same and increased. I mean, this year already it's increased from last year, it's 2.5 million, it's just over 2.7 million this year. So I think centrally government recognised that there is a growing need for this grant. We're living in a country where there's an ageing population, more people need these adaptations. It's preventing people from going into care and obviously needing carers assistance at home. So I think it's calculated roughly against our population size, and there is a matrix that they work it out at, but I'm not entirely sure how. Relative needs formula. David's just updated me there. Thank you, David.
Just a very quick, I think it might be the appropriate place. In just relation, there was some concern some years ago that if you didn't spend your allocation, the government, there would be clawback from the government, as indicating you didn't need it.
There's always been that concern, but I've never known any council that's had to give back any underspend because it's always spent in the following year. And there's a famous case Birmingham City Council lost where they suggested they didn't have enough money to pay for a DFG and they lost that case. So we can't use not having enough money to not pay for a DFG. So I think it's recognised that any underspend that we have will be used and spent, committed in the following financial year. So we don't give it back, no.
And they're suggesting...
So is everyone happy with the suggestion of a top-up of 20,000 as opposed to 30? David.
Andy.
Andy.
Can I ask a question? How many households will be affected if 20,000 is the figure instead of 30,000? And what effect will it have on those households?
Over the last 3 years, as I said, we've done about 28 cases that have needed, 28 cases for extensions basically. Most of our work is level access showers, ramps, stair lifts. So all I can sort of feedback on is data that we've previously done. The demand for extensions isn't increasing because we always try and find the most cost-effective solution. So by introducing a top-up of 20 as opposed to 30, given the cost of materials and labour as it is now, I don't think any houses will be disadvantaged, no, because I'll come on to it later on in my presentation. If there are any cases that go over the threshold, I'm looking to introduce a separate independent panel. So for those cases that do go over the proposed 50,000 threshold, we could still capture those people and help them. So no one will be disadvantaged.
So effectively, whether we choose 20 or 30 isn't going to make much difference because we'll still end up spending the same amount and rescuing the same number of families.
Potentially, yes, but the idea is obviously any cases that go over the threshold, we do always try and encourage as much as we can the client or the housing association to pay for that top-up. My concern is if housing associations, if they know that upper limit is 20,000, which brings their overall cost to 30,000, they're less likely to make any financial contribution themselves. And we're constantly encouraging housing associations to make a financial contribution to this.
Okay, I now understand the distinction. Effectively, this is we are trying to make sure that the housing associations make a fair contribution to looking after their tenants. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
David, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to. I mean, Amy's already referred to the rising costs of materials, and bearing in mind how frequently you review these sorts of policies, it will probably be another 5 to 10 years or so before it's brought back in that sense. Just to give you a bit of an idea about the sorts of costs which could be incurred by the local authority if there were delays in applying DFGs or to other public bodies. So the average cost of an acute hospital bed is about £3,500 per week. And so effectively, if someone is delayed in hospital because of decision making around whether an adaptation can be completed or not, it only takes 3 weeks before that additional 10,000 is swallowed up by the public sector. Yes, I know that's not necessarily the local authority, albeit that the ICB do have to agree to any changes that we do make to discretionary elements of the Disabled Facilities Grant. If, for example, that person didn't need to be in hospital and had to go into a residential care home, then again we're looking at costs of a minimum of £750 per week to the local authority. It doesn't take long for that to be subsumed within our revenue account or saved, so I'm always just that little bit cognizant, as long as we've got the right controls in place to enable you to have confidence that we're not allocating 30,000 of discretionary funding versus 20,000 inappropriately, I would encourage you to think about the higher amount. That would be my suggestion, because it enables officers to do what they need to do, and it potentially has a positive impact on revenue implications for the local authority, particularly around adult social care. Because, as I say, if I can't keep someone at home because of an additional £10,000, which isn't going to come through that discretionary, it doesn't take long for us to subsume that within our revenue budget when you look at some of the costs associated with people with complex disabilities.
Okay. Slightly confused now because we've got two recommendations from officers.
I mean, obviously it's
different areas, but yeah.
I mean, yes, I mean, the idea when we go to the independent board as well is when we take those exceptional cases that go over the threshold, the suggestion is that we put two assistant directors on that board together with the portfolio holder for housing to make a decision on how the council fund that additional amount, whether it comes from the DFG budget or whether a contribution could be made from adult social care, because ultimately what we're trying to do is reduce people from needing to go into care and to keep them living independently in their own property. So it's working out how, how we apportion those funds. But I hear David's points. Absolutely, I hear what David's trying to say. Yes.
David.
I suppose my challenge to that would be adult social care overspent its budget last year, and we've got reserves within our disabled facilities grant. My argument would be, why would we put more strain on our revenue budget when we have capital to potentially spend? But this is shaping the policy. Ultimately, executive will make that decision moving forward. But that would be my pushback on it.
Okay.
We'll take that one away then, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Amy. Thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it. And of course, yes, as you're absolutely right, I've got that experience of having had those phone conversations from you and the requests to move ahead with some of them. And of course, it was very, very challenging because, of course, of the rising costs in construction, as you rightly say. It would have been near on impossible to do those works within those budget envelopes that are provided through the DFG. One of the questions that I've got is, I completely understand this and the different, basically we're talking about a different level of governance for anything that goes over the proposed £50,000 envelope. And of course with that £50,000, that just makes life a lot simpler. It means you can get on with it and go, right, okay, yes, it goes over the 30,000. However, we've got that extra 20,000, kind of crack on, and you've got that delegated authority then. How long, and I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm going to jump ahead a tiny bit, because it helps make that decision about whether it's 20 or 30. How long will it potentially take to go through that board process? Taking on board what David has just said, if we then talk about an extra month, 2 months, and bearing in mind the costs that David has talked about on sort of that daily basis, I think that would help us make that decision as to whether it should be pushed to the 30 or stick at the 20.
The intention is to set up this independent board, but we haven't obviously set a cycle of meetings yet. It would largely be ad hoc, and I'd probably call to Councillor Rowley to convene it around the assistant director's availability on an ad hoc basis. We could put it in the diary for every month. I believe it probably only need to meet 2 or 3 times a year, or as and when a case arises that we need to make that a decision. So I'd like to think we could convene it fairly quickly to get that decision, so we can then understand what the funding is and crack on with the works, as you say. So not to keep the applicant waiting, because there's already lots of delays with this process. Planning in itself obviously slows everything down for 2 months. So I wouldn't want to put any delays in place, no. So as soon as we can get that, if we can do that on email, maybe it might not need. The design and the setup of this independent board hasn't been mapped out yet. If it could be done on a Teams meeting, that would be great, or whether it needs to be a face-to-face meeting, or whether we could present the medical evidence and do it on email to the relevant assistant directors and the portfolio holder. Maybe it could be done instantly. So we'll think about how we set up that independent board and get your agreement as to how we convene it and facilitate it.
Yeah, I don't know how many you had when you were a portfolio. I think I've had 2 or 3, and one of those was additional on top of what I'd already approved. So I don't envisage many being there, no. But it's not going to be a public meeting, so we don't have to give X number of days notice. So we could. There's no reason why we couldn't have them on Teams very quickly.
Yeah, if I can just quickly. Yeah, and I think. Of course, that's something to be taken up offline, and I think, you know, if we are saying that, oh no, it doesn't have to be set, as you say, Councillor Riley, on certain dates, then I feel reassured that we're able to move on it quite quickly, as very much as we were, Amy, when you sort of came with those ones to myself, and I think similar to yourself, I only had sort of 2 or 3. And we would discuss them verbally, and then, of course, agree it formally over email, so that there was an audit trail. I think if that's in place, I'm therefore kind of reassured with that type of process that it can be moved at some pace, rather than waiting to formally convene a meeting, as with some of our other processes. Therefore, I would be happy with the £20,000 proposal there. Thanks, okay. Chair.
Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly understand all the arguments. It's just how helpful or unhelpful are social landlords in actually topping up or coming forward to top up and help? Because I say I understand all the arguments, and you know some of them aren't short of funds either. So.
No, so Orbit used to pay £2,000 to £5,000 per property. The only helpful one now, Greatwell Homes, who pay 50%. The others don't pay any financial contribution at all, and we've battled with them, met with them over the years, even going back to the legacy days when we were districts and boroughs. They've never been able to assist with their adaptations for us or for their tenants. So I do plan to revisit that again. It's been probably 18 months now since I've met with them all and talked to them all about that. So I need to address that with them, but it will always be that they don't have the money, and obviously we can't legally force them to make a contribution. Any support I can get from anyone I'd be grateful for, but it's asking them and encouraging them to make a financial contribution towards their tenants' adaptations.
Okay. Yep.
No, just to thank you for that. I mean, obviously across North Northampton we have different ageing populations and different age groups. Not only I was from East Northampton, I think we are, or at the time, had the highest number of ageing populations, and I think, I don't know the difference between the social landlords across North Northampton in relation to different areas, but obviously East Northampton was all out, so I don't know if it has the highest proportion of social landlords and the highest proportion of ageing populations. So, you know, that would concern me, Chair, in relation to what you said, as then social landlords not being helpful in coming forward and supporting, as I said, the ageing population, growing population, and probably a deterioration of the housing stock as well, because the properties are getting quite old as well. So it's not a good place on that front. So I mean, it is disappointing to hear that they're not contributing more and helping out in relation to you know, what is a big issue across North Northampton.
In terms of the stats, I haven't got them to hand, but most of our grants are actually delivered to homeowners anyway. I mean, I can't remember roughly how many we provide to housing associations. They're not in the high numbers anyway, so it tends to be that often social tenants, certainly within our own stock as well, they often get rehoused because that's a quicker option. So I can go away and find out if you'd like that information, but a huge amount of this money doesn't go towards social adaptations anyway. So
I think all the ones I've been asked for this year have been private.
most of them are private.
Yeah. did you want to come in again?
Yeah, and thank you. Councillor North, you reminded me, which is talking about ageing population, well, I probably should have written something down because that was a point that I was going to raise as well. So thank you very much for that. And Councillor North is absolutely right, and I completely echo the comment that you've just made and said disappointing, and I would have to wholeheartedly agree. And I think, Amy, I'm saddened but also pleased by what you've just said, as in it very much mirrors my experience as being that previous portfolio holder, that I found Great Well Homes to be a very engaging social housing provider. So I'm pleased to hear the fact that they are providing that 50%. And unfortunately, it does, as I say, mirror my experience in that the other social housing providers were not very engaging when I was the portfolio holder. And I am disappointed that they're not willing to step up and help support the residents, for which I think that they, very much feel that they've got a duty for. And also, as we know, those social housing providers, they've got more flexibility with regards to their finances and their governance as to what we have as a local authority providing social housing. So I am disappointed by that.
There's two big mergers, isn't there? Longhurst and another taking place next year. So I'm hoping with that big merger, maybe there's a revisit of their policies and budget responsibilities. So fingers crossed for that one.
Councillor Buckingham, and then we'll move on to the next bit.
Yeah, and I'm aware that most housing associations, like council, have a separate budget for DFGs. They don't always go through the DFG route. They use some of their own. You were talking about Longhurst and Grand Union merger, which is happening soon, which will be right the way across Northamptonshire. I do have inroads into both those organisations, so I will certainly be able to assist you with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Got a very curious situation. We've got 3 current or previous portfolio holders for housing here sitting in a row. I don't think that's probably ever happened before. Anyway, my point was going to be that these housing associations cover much larger areas than Northamptonshire. So assuming they have a single policy for their entire area, it means that we are, if you like, trying to persuade them to do something that they don't want to do in other areas, other districts as well. So in trying to put pressure on them, it might be an idea for Northamptonshire to work in cooperation with some of our neighbours to try and put pressure jointly on these housing associations to step up to the mark.
Okay.
Noted, that's something I'll take away and look into. Thank you. Thank you, yes.
Okay, if you want to go on to the next bit.
Okay, thank you. So moving on then, another picture here. Just this is a good example to highlight of a complex case that did go over the thresholds. It actually was an adaptation for 2 disabled children, so it requires quite extensive works involving a ramp, equipment storage inside, a through-floor lift, ceiling track hoists, and provided a bedroom for 2 disabled children. So, our second proposal out of 10, so I'll try and swift through this one. This one is about the means test. So just to explain briefly and quickly as I can, the means test currently is that everyone that needs a disabled facilities grant undergoes a means test. Certain people on certain benefits are passported through. There's no means test for children's applications. What we're suggesting here is, on the advice again from Foundations, is that we remove the means test requirement for all cases for equipment up to £8,000. This will certainly help us in reducing officer time in carrying out all the applications and the means testing, and it will enable us to provide equipment cases such as stair lifts and ceiling track hoists much more quickly. And then the means test for larger scale works then will take place on all the other applications. So we're recommending that we implement no means test for equipment works up to £8,000. Is there any questions on that?
Yeah. I don't have a problem with the means test. If it's coupled with OT delays, so it's the occupational therapists brought out a report a few years ago called Adaptation Without Delays. So you would have these smaller pockets of that wouldn't have to go through that whole 6 months, 8 months, year wait for adaptation. So if you put that in with this sort of means testing, so you would have those smaller, no?
No, it's the opposite.
Okay. You would have those smaller adaptations which would be non-means tested, but without the need for that delay with the OTs, which again would help with finances, the other side of things.
What I'd say on that is we work very closely with our OTs now. So historically, I remember well, years ago, the wait for an OT assessment would be months and months and months. It's now 8 to 10 weeks. It's improved massively. We work very closely with COTS, and their waiting lists have come down. And we even make a small contribution towards their services now that we have permission from through DMT some months ago. So I don't envisage the delay for an OT impacting on this either. We both work so closely together that we should still be able to provide this adaptation for this particular type of work in a speedily time. And we would need an OT recommendation anyway before we could carry out work such as this. So that part of the process is still quite important. Did you want to come in there?
Yeah, can I say? Sorry, hi. All I wanted to say about the delays is that when we deal with equipment cases only, so it's not building works and equipment, it's just equipment, we don't add them to a waiting list. So we have no delays in delivering these works. So what I'm trying to say is when we have an OT recommendation for building works, they have to go on a waiting list depending on the date and the priority. When it comes to equipment, we don't have a waiting list. They come in and we issue them out to tender so we get the quotes. So if it makes it all a little bit quicker. Yes, we have to wait for the OT assessment and recommendation, so there is a bit of delay there, but from our behalf, we don't make them wait. There's
no surveyor time needed, that's why. It's because we order in the stair lift and then it gets installed, whereas with building works, it's the surveyor time that's our waits currently.
And maybe you can't give me a definitive answer on this one, but is that across the board with our own OT assessments as a council rather than the private sector? And I realise that, you know, you can only give me bits on yours because, you know, I've known waits for up to 18 months or tried to get into the OT for residents of council housing and haven't been able to get it. So is that OT assessment across the board?
I understand it is cross tenure, that waiting list, but I would need to check, Councillor Buckingham, if that's okay, because I can only speak for the private sector, but as far as I understand, they manage their lists for everyone. Every Northamptonshire resident that needs an assessment goes in the same front door and is put on that waiting list, and they're triaged, and they're either sent to us or they're sent to the in-house council surveyors, but I will check.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't like means tests in general because they first of all they discourage people from coming forward sometimes who deserve things, and secondly they take up a lot of officer time, and thirdly you can then have disputes about the result afterwards, which is very unsatisfactory from every point of view. So the more that we can lift out of the band where we need to test them, the better. So I would support even going to £10,000 as the threshold, let alone 8,000.
Okay, thank you. That's noted. Obviously, when we look at the other proposals later on, we would perhaps need to decide at the end how we then limit some of these proposals, because the budget that we're allocated annually is still the same. And obviously, my concern is if we increase the threshold for some of these proposals, we're not going to be able to provide all of the additional discretionary measures that we want to provide. That's my only concern with that.
Okay. Everyone else happy with the recommendation for 8? Yeah, okay. Moving on.
Okay, so the second part of the means test, basically, as I've said before, you means test the applicants, but for children's applications, they don't make any contribution. What we're suggesting on this slide is that for children's adaptations that go over the threshold for the discretionary element, the parents are now means tested, because what's happened previously, there's no means test at all for the discretionary top-up. We're looking to introduce a means test on children's cases, because what we've seen over the years is that there perhaps are a lot of families that perhaps could afford it themselves, but because there's no means test on children's cases for the discretionary top-up, we wish to introduce a means test for their top-up only. So the means test would stay the same for the adults application and for the discretionary top-up. If they're on a passported benefit, they'd go straight through anyway, but we're looking to introduce a means test for parents on the top-up. The alternative would be to put a land charge on, but I'll come on to land charges later on, but we're looking to recommend option C1 here, where we means test the parents for the top-up.
I'm a bit confused because C says parents not means tested.
Parents not means tested. Children's applications, let me see, children's applications.
C1.
On C it says...
C1, it's C1 we're looking to introduce. So
yeah,
the children, they're eligible for discretionary top-up.
It's the one below.
And
but
it's
you
the
said
one below, C1,
one below,
yes, C1, beg your pardon, C1.
Where it says proposal.
Proposal, because that's current policy.
Oh,
Current policy is the proposal below.
right, ignore me then. I'm not reading it. Councillor Mercer, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, your recommendation is option C1, so that the parents are means tested for children's applications, blah, blah, blah. The alternative is that a land charge is put on. The land charge is only worth putting on if the amounts are significant, 30, 50 grand. 10 grand isn't worth it. What sort of figures are we talking about here? Are they going to be ones that are at the lower end or the higher end?
For the land charges, it's explained later on in the proposal. So the land charges that were put on, it's anything over £5,000 up to a maximum ceiling of £15,000. We put a £10,000 charge on. That's what we do currently. And then we put on the additional amount from the discretionary element as a land charge as well. But to not get confused with land charges, because I do talk about that later on, this is just talking about means testing the children for the discretionary top-up.
I have to say I'm very uncomfortable about means testing for children's applications. Very uncomfortable.
Councillor North?
I know this won't help, Chair, but to some extent it depends on what we agree on the top-up value, because to me there's quite a differential between is it worth means testing if the top-up's only a certain amount, but if we raise it to a higher amount, you know, again, is it worth it? Because obviously with as we've discussed today, with all the increases in costs everywhere, construction and everything, some of the top-up element wouldn't necessarily be a huge amount in relation to affordability. So I suppose what I'm saying is, Joe, with all the increases in costs around across the country, across the board with everything, you know, means tested on a smaller top-up may not be beneficial, because although the adults may be able to afford it, in relation to everything that's changing in relation to incomes and the costs and the economy, that value may not be a huge amount, if that makes any sense, or might not be making any sense at all. So,
I mean, the idea is that the money is awarded to those that are in greatest financial need. And what we've seen with working on many life cases over the years is that there are a lot of children's cases, you know, where they could probably afford to pay the top-up themselves. We still give them the first £30,000. We're just asking them to pay, in this case, the additional top-up if it was required for an extension. So it would be for the extra £20,000 if they were able to pay for it themselves. Obviously, by carrying out a means test would determine their financial eligibility, so that the wider pot that's left over would be awarded to those more perhaps deserving families that have less money. That's the idea behind it. So that we are sticking by the original principles and providing these grants to those that most deserve it, that are financially vulnerable.
Yeah, Chair, I did understand all that. The only concern, again, Chair, I have with that is means testing takes longer. And, you know, the needs of the children may not be done based on the value of the income of the parents. If the children's in need for that grant, you know, should it be right that we take longer just because the parents have got more income to contribute towards it, because means testing takes longer? I think it's about the delivery of the need of the DFG, in my view, rather than the financial situation of the children's parents. Surely it's the need of the children.
Okay. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a slightly different concern, and that is that the most vulnerable and the most needy are the people who are most likely to be discouraged by having to go through paperwork and defend themselves, give all of their means, their income, etc. They're the sort of people who are going to be, putting it bluntly, shy, the sort of people who are likely to be intimidated by officialdom. So precisely the people we're most trying to help are the ones that are least likely to get help if there's a means test. So there's a contradiction there.
All I can say in practice is we've not been up against any resistance, and we've got a number of grant support officers that help with the application process. And yes, there is time taken to fill an application form, and there's a time taken to gather financial information and carry out a means test, but we have a number of officers that do support those families. We even go out to their properties if need be, if we can't do it over the phone or over email. And for that reason, there's never been any families that we've turned away because of the difficulties in getting to the application stage. And I hear what you're saying, that there are vulnerable people out there. They don't have access to our online information, which is why we've got those grant support officers in place to reach out to them, to target them, and to encourage them to submit the necessary information that they need so that they can put in a valid application so that we can help them.
I'm afraid you're misunderstanding slightly my concern.
Oh,
my concern is that the most vulnerable people are the ones that you don't see, the ones that don't have access to online media, the ones who are intimidated by officialdom, intimidated by digital systems. Those people you don't actually see at all. So you can't say that they didn't get a grant because they never got to the point of asking for it, simply because they were intimidated by the system. And the more complex the system is, the more interrogation is involved in it, the more those people are more likely to be discouraged from coming forward. I occasionally see it in my casework, people who are just timid. That's the bottom line.
I hear what you're saying, and perhaps we should get better at. We haven't previously been proactive in advertising this because the demand is so high, and we obviously often get referrals also from adult social care, from community safety, from doctors, from consultants. We do get referrals, so one way to address that is to perhaps get better at advertising these grants within our GP surgeries and hospitals and community groups, so that people aren't excluded. But to overcome their fear of coming to the council in the first place.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I go around door knocking as I'm a politician, it's my job. And in the last couple of weeks, I've knocked on several doors and found people who were clearly in need, but who would never, ever ask for help. And the more that they have to approach officialdom, paperwork, etc., the less chance we've got of getting those people to come forward. And I only find them because I knock on their door, and that's something the council will never do. So you won't see them by the method by which we do. So we as politicians see very vulnerable people who need help, and the current way that we do things makes it unlikely we'll get to and help those most vulnerable people. That's my personal concern.
I mean, this is for the top-up as well, so for the first £30,000, there was no means testing for children. So the argument of people being timid and not coming, we can have this argument all day long.
And that applies to a lot of services as well. And I do hear you. With my environmental health hat on, as I used to be, you know, I'd work quite closely within the community, and there are people in the communities that just won't want our help with any of our services. They're very proud people. They don't want any financial assistance. We deal with some of those people ourselves. They're very proud, and there's people now. Another thing that I'll come on to later is home repair grants and energy grants, and people don't want our help. And I hear what you're saying. How do we target those people in fuel poverty? How do we target them? And we call upon yourselves and other members of the community to reach out to those people and encourage them to take our help. But there will be a small number that just will resist, and we need to just think of more clever, innovative ways to target them and help them. But I hear what you're saying.
Okay, so in terms of the recommendation for this bit, are we happy about means testing the top-up part for children's? Bearing in mind, we're not making a decision, we're just putting recommendations forward.
I'm not happy with it, but I'm probably in the minority.
So, you agreeing with it or agreeing with the councillors over here? Right. Okay. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on, talking about land charges now then. So currently, the current policy is a maximum grant of £30,000. We currently put on a land charge of a maximum of £10,000. So for all works over 5,000 up to a ceiling of 15. That was the recommendation that we've had from foundations in the past. That's what other councils seem to do. And then with the discretionary top-up of 10,000 currently, we put a land charge of 15. So currently, the maximum land charge is £15,000 currently under the current arrangements. What we're proposing now is to only put land charges on properties where we're doing extensive builds, because we have seen on the odd occasion in the past where we do invest all that money in a grant and then they move house, all the tenants move on, and it's a waste. So we want to stop that from happening. But for things like through-floor lifts, stair lifts, children that are placed in long-term foster homes, we're looking at not having a charge on the property for those types of works because we don't see the added value. So we're recommending here that options 1 to 5 are implemented because, as I said, those land charges do not, they don't cost a huge amount, and it's unlikely that they're going to move house after we've installed those measures. Is that clear on the proposal?
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm comfortable with most of this, but not 3. I think the figure of £200 is too low. The reason I say that is because I've been involved in this sort of thing in the past, and the costs in terms of officer time, legal time, and subsequent processing, it just doesn't make it economic at 200. So I would make it a minimum of 2,000, not 200.
Do you have a comment on that, Alina, from a surveyor point of view?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, all I just wanted to say is the £200 we've put it there is because sometimes we have so if you go, for example, with a current mandatory grant of 30k and we put a land charge for over 5k up to 15, so if the cost of a stair lift was going to be £5,200, we would have to put a land charge on the £200. That's what we're trying to say. Do you see what I mean? No? Okay. So a mandatory grant is £30,000. Someone is asking for a stair lift. The cost of the stair lift is £5,200. Because the land charge is applicable over 5k, that means we will have to put a land charge for that £200 over the 5k. And that's why we're saying for an amount of such a minimum amount, we wouldn't be entertaining it. That's what we're trying to say.
I can understand not putting a land charge on for, say, £199, because it's probably going to cost £300 or £400 to do all the paperwork behind it. But I can't see the point in putting a land charge on £1,000 or even £2,000 because it just isn't economic.
There wouldn't be a land charge on just £200. What they're saying is, because the land charge is put on when it's £5,000, if it was just over that £5,000, they wouldn't put the land charge on because it was only a minimum amount.
So it's not, yeah, so it's not £200 the land charge, it's £5,200.
Yeah. So if the look at a practical example, if the stair lift was £6,000, we put a charge on anything over £5,000. So if the stair lift cost £6,000, we'd put a £1,000 charge on. If the stair lift was £5,500, we'd put a land charge for £500 on. Does that make more sense?
Well, so what you're saying is that you put the charge on and you are going to try and recover the £500
Yes,
after the house
if it was
is sold.
5,500, yes.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm not comfortable at all, because the cost of organising that for all the different properties that you do it for, opposed to the actual amount of income you get, isn't justified. When I was on East Northants Council, I looked into this and I found that East Northants Council in something like 10 years had not managed to recover more than a few pence on the land charges they put on in a whole series of properties, and they were putting on larger sums than this, and it still wasn't economic. The reason for doing it is to try and recover some of the capital money to the council to give to other presumably deserving recipients.
Right.
But it was actually costing more to do it than was being recovered. And that's why I'm uncomfortable about a figure that low. I think that East Northants, the threshold was about 10,000.
I recall that it was at the time. All I'd say is, again, procedures have improved since then. It is a case of filling in a form and sending it to our legal department. I think we've recovered so far close to about 80,000 since we've been NNC across all of the north. So we are recovering grants where conditions have been breached. There is paperwork involved and officer time involved, but we see it benefit if we do get to claw back collectively some of that money from a number of grants where people have breached their conditions and sold their properties, and it is money back in the pot that's then recycled to help other people.
Well, has the NNC actually recouped any monies as a result of putting on land charges, and roughly how much is that, so we can compare it with the workload and costs involved? Because
about 80,000 since vesting day we've recovered.
So since vesting day, there's about 80,000, so that's what, roughly about 30,000 a year. Actually, it's less than that. It's about 25,000 a year, which is half of one middle-ranking officer in terms of our costs.
Full-time.
Full-time, I'm talking about. Yeah, it's a half-time of an officer. Is that justified in financially?
Okay. Just to move this on, what I think we need to look at for proposal 3 is that figure of £200. Is it economically viable for the council to do it? I'm not asking for a number now. It's for when it comes to exec and full council, is to look at that number and make sure it's
viable.
Actually it's a viable number. We're not going to spend more than we actually recover each time.
May I just say one thing? Sorry. What I want to say is that currently, if the cost of works was 5,200, we put a land charge for 200. So what we're trying to do with item 3 is avoid doing this.
We're just saying we need to make sure that
we're trying to make it a little bit more economical by actually not doing it for a small value.
But we need to make sure that
the value
there actually means we're actually recouping more than we're paying out.
Is everyone very happy with what you've just said?
Is everyone else happy with the other options?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. This just illustrates a 3-floor lift that we did for a disabled child coming through from the dining room into their bedroom. So we'll move on to proposal 4. So this we see as a benefit fast-tracking application. So to simply explain this, we currently, obviously, the people come to the occupational therapist for an assessment. The case then comes to us and we manage our own waiting list to allocate them to a surveyor. We manage our waiting list in need order, so occupational therapists send their assessments, recommendations through to us, and they are rated either critical, urgent or standard. We deal with the critical first, then the urgent, then the standards, and then eventually obviously the standards move up the list and get seen as well. We approve valid applications within 6 months. What we're proposing here is for those residents that are critically ill, in need to be discharged from hospital quickly, or are terminally ill in need of palliative care, we basically fast track them ahead of the criticals and deal with them as quickly as we can. We don't currently have a process to deal with them at the moment. We often get pressures from the occupational therapist to, can you deal with my case literally next week because this person's only got 6 months left to live. So this introduction to the policy allows us to fast track those cases.
I presume everyone's happy with that. David,
it just formalises it in policy.
I presume David's happy with this as well. Okay. Yeah.
Here's just a picture of a shower stretcher and a ceiling track hoist that we did in one property, just to illustrate the good work that we do. Dementia grants. So this is new. Dementia grants. Currently, we would obviously deal with people that are suffering from dementia perhaps later on in life, but this allows us to deal with them earlier on if we can. The reason being is that there's a big push nationally to help people with dementia, so we're looking at providing dementia grants specifically, anything over £1,000, so that we can help them early doors to prevent the need for them to be rehoused and to go into adult social care and to promote independent and safe living for them. The works included would be things like contrasting colours between walls and doors, changing the carpets, putting safer flooring. It's putting in those early measures before their condition deteriorates.
Any comments or looks? Councillor Mercer.
Sorry to keep coming back. Proposal, introduction of dementia grants over a cost of £1,000. I'm not absolutely certain that that's unambiguous. Do you mean costs up to £1,000 or costs over £1,000?
Sorry, yeah, they will be entitled to a 30,000 mandatory grant, which is the DFG, but anything below £1,000 would be covered by currently Millbrooks, which is the minor adaptations. So if someone had dementia and they needed any works that would cost £500, it doesn't come to the council through an OT recommendation for a DFG. It goes from the occupational therapist to Millbrooks and they do the works. But we deal with anything above £1,000.
So what's the upper limit?
30.
The upper limit would still be the same, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Buckingham.
I welcome this because it just makes a lot of sense. I'd like to see it across both the council and as well as private. But yes, welcome the initiative to bring it in.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like everyone's in agreement with that one.
And this picture here illustrates what we were talking about with the contrasting tiles within the bathroom here. Okay, so motor neurone disease, I'm sure you're all aware about this. Again, we do help residents that have this condition, but what we're looking to introduce here is assist them at early doors, fast-tracking them again effectively. So there is no current specific policy on residents with motor neurone disease. They would be entitled to the full £30,000, but what we're looking at doing is helping them at early doors. So often with people with motor neurone disease, they have a diagnosis, but they're perhaps still able to work, they're still able to earn a decent salary, and then their condition deteriorates quite quickly. So we're looking to not apply the means test for the first £5,000 when we detect them at early doors, and we can start works. So by the time that the extension or whatever is put in place, when they've perhaps stopped being able to work and earning money, they've already got the adaptation that they need in place, so they don't have to wait. So the works are there for them, because this condition can cause a lot of deterioration in some people quite rapidly as the disease escalates rapidly. So it's allowing us under policy to address them early doors, if that makes sense. Because what we've seen in practice is by the time we get to help them, then we go through all the processes of means testing and planning permission, their condition is already such that they're in need of the ground floor bedroom or toilet or whatever it is that they might need.
It's another one that seems to make sense. It's another bit that seems to make sense. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay.
both of these new discretionary measures that we're introducing, it's obviously all subject to funding available, because obviously the focus will always be on the mandatory grants, but obviously addressing these people with these conditions early doors, it's just allowing us to be more, use our discretionary powers more, so we support this as well. There's some pictures of some stair lifts that we've installed over the years, different types of stair lifts to allow people to get safely from the ground floor to the first floor. The independent panels, this is our 7th proposal. We touched on this earlier, so I think we've almost made a decision on this. So for those cases that go over the threshold of what will be £50,000, hopefully if we can decide them on email, on a Teams meeting, I'm proposing that the 2 assistant directors from Adult Social Services and Children's Services and the Portfolio for Housing perhaps sit on that panel, and they can look at the case on an independent basis outside of regulatory services, and they can decide if we pay the additional amount over the threshold or not. So it's recommending that we introduce that panel, which is similar to what we've got in place now through yourselves, Councillor Binley and Councillor Rowley. But it's just formalising it.
Councillor Buckingham.
And again, it's one of those issues that so needed. Yes, makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I'm just surprised it doesn't exist already.
It kind of does on an informal basis. So I'll get a phone, as you probably did, get a phone call and a conversation to agree the top-up, but it's very informal, whereas at least having adult services and children's services there to advise me while I'm in this portfolio, I'd find that a great help, because I can ask them the relevant questions before approve and get a in the rounds approval.
Well, I would like to see it formalised and proper terms of reference produced for this panel, so it's properly regulated and no one can challenge it.
Yeah, it will be. That's the whole reason for doing it.
It'll be formalised through the policy, yes, noted. Thank you. Okay, another example of this is a garage conversion this time, which was converted into a bedroom and level access shower for an individual, together with a ramp to give them access. This was a wheelchair user. Proposal 8 then, so equipment. So we provide lots of equipment, stair lifts, ceiling track hoists, etc. The current policy is that they get a 12-month warranty. Through experience over the years, we've seen that stair lifts break down, equipment can break, and if it's outside of warranty, the disabled person has to pay for it themselves to get it fixed. They often can't afford to do this, so we're looking to extend the warranty from 12 months to 5 years. This will cover the call-out fees and any repairs up to £500. By introducing this, it will stop the need for new OC recommendations coming through and wasted money being spent on a new stair lift when actually the old one can be fixed. So this hopefully is quite straightforward. We're looking to introduce options A and B there to extend the warranty and to cover call-out fees and repairs up to £500.
Before anyone else asks it, what happens over £500? Because I can't remember when I asked.
Well, over £500 then. I mean, from again, Alina will know more. The cost isn't usually over £500, is it?
No,
very rarely.
Normally, when people call, we need to pay for the call-out fee, and then it's the battery. It's a battery problem, so that's the quickest and easier fix, and it won't cost more than £500, including the battery cost and the call-out fee. That's why we put that amount. If we were to say we're going to send the equipment company to check the lift, we need to pay for a call-out fee. But then if they said that the cost of works is far more, then we will have to consider whether we need an annuity recommendation for a new stair lift, whether it's cost-effective to pay
so
for the repair.
It'll go through the grant system again.
Yeah.
Right.
So the 500 is for the easiest fix, which is call-out fee and battery.
Okay. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this one is obligatory almost, because otherwise someone might argue we're in breach of the Sale of Goods Act of 1964. Because if they made any sort of financial contribution themselves towards it, and we didn't give them what the law has interpreted as a reasonable warranty, then the courts would imply one there, and we would be in breach of the law. So I think we've got to do this. It should have been done before.
This is the warranty provided by the supplier. So the supplier was the one who'd have the legislation against them, not us.
Well, someone would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're just making sure we got the, again...
They have to have, yeah, that's correct. They have to have a warranty. Like most things you buy nowadays comes with a warranty, and it is usually 12 months. As I say, we're just looking to extend it to 5 months. 5 years, sorry.
We're just adding
value,
Yeah.
giving it.
Well, the courts have interpreted the warranty period that they think should be there, the reasonable one, according to the expected lifespan of the product. And for something like a stair lift, 12 months is way too low. And the courts, if anyone challenged it, would clobber us. So we've got to do this.
Okay. Well, we are formalising this now, so good.
Okay.
Just a quick question, following up from Councillor Mercer's comments, because I do happen to know quite a bit about consumer rights. Do they actually purchase, for example, the example given, stair lift, do they purchase it from us, i.e. via us, or do they make the purchase directly with the supplier, as in the person who's applying for it?
Each case goes out to tender. Lena's probably best placed to answer that as the...
Yes, sorry. So each equipment case goes out to tender. We get the tenders back, and then when we have the works awarded, then this supplier will install it, and then they will provide the 12 months warranty as a given. It's a standard. And then in their quote, they will have the extended warranty for the 5 years, which will come with a cost, whether it's a stair lift or a through floor lift. Normally for through floor lifts is about £8,000. So in the past, the applicant would have the option of purchasing it if they could afford it, and they went straight to the supplier. Shall I just, yeah, so they went straight to the supplier and purchased that warranty themselves. If they couldn't afford it, then they were left with the 12 months that was coming as a standard. But what we're trying to say is we want to pay for that extended warranty. So so if the cost of the stair lift is £5,000, then we'll probably pay about another 2.5 for the 5-year extended warranty.
So the contract, though, with the supplier, is that with NNC or is it with...
No, it's a
the
different
resident?
supplier.
Different supplier.
It's, yeah, we have different equipment suppliers.
We don't have a contract with any of our suppliers. We have a list of registered contractors. So for each disabled facilities grant that we administer, we put each job out to tender, as it were, and then we obviously constantly demonstrating value for money. So we pick the lowest quote, and then there's a small works agreement that's the contracts between the supplier and the residents. That's how that's managed, if that makes sense. We don't have contracts with any of our suppliers. We put everything out to tender.
Okay, sorry. I probably not made it clear. So with as far as the supplier is concerned, who has purchased the goods is what I'm saying. Is it NNC or is it the resident?
Whose name's on the invoice at the end of the day?
It's not our name. It's the resident, because the contract is between them and the supplier.
Okay, so
we
then
pay on behalf of the resident.
We are a facilitator.
We're a facilitator, yeah, that's the word.
Right, okay, so just to kind of clarify all the situation then, ultimately the resident wouldn't really have recourse to come back to us with regards to any kind of issue there. It would actually be that, in effect, the contract is between the supplier and the resident and not NNC.
Correct.
No vicarious liability,
Correct.
etc. would exist there. Of course, what I would say then is probably, and Councillor Mercer is absolutely right, and in fact one of the examples used in consumer law is, as an example, is a pen. You know, a pen, you wouldn't really have recourse to go and take a case to court if it died after 10 years. They go, well, hang on, looking at the cost versus the expected lifespan, you wouldn't expect it, bearing in mind how much you paid for it, even though this one was free, to last any longer, and you haven't kind of got any legal recourse. But Councillor Mercer is absolutely right in that when it's something as expensive as a stair lift, that's exactly why it says about a warranty, this does not affect your statutory rights, because your statutory rights are that it's expected to last, in all likelihood, not predetermining anything from a court's perspective, but a court would say, yeah, come on, that was that amount of money, that is expected to last longer than 12 months, and you know it. So I think that there's probably an element there whereby we perhaps should pick up a little bit of training from an officer perspective in that consumer rights field, to be able to perhaps advise the residents when they're ringing us, i.e. direct them perhaps to citizens' advice. They'd be a prime example, to get them to take that forward, because whilst I support this, at the same time, I think that the manufacturer/supplier is shirking their responsibility, i.e. their statutory responsibility that they have, where, you know, they're charging call-out fees for something that could be 12 months and 1 day old, and saying, right, okay, yeah, you've got to pay, and it turns out that it is a fault with the product, or the product has just completely fallen to pieces on 12 months and 1 day old. It's fallen to pieces, and they go, oh yeah, you've got to buy a new one. That wouldn't be reasonable. So I think it's something that we probably need to look at. Whilst I agree with this, I think we need to
take that away.
That.
Absolutely, look into that further. Yes.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you. And my point is around clarity. So in paragraph 2 there, you've mentioned maintenance, service, repairs and warranties. So I believe a warranty is if a piece of equipment fails, and that is covered under parts and labour and all the rest. But who does the maintenance and the servicing, and is that part of any warranty brought in, please?
So normally, obviously, each supplier has their own rules, should I say. So when you see when you go with a certain supplier, you will see what they provide you under the 12 months warranty or the 5 years warranty. But normally what they do is within the 12 months, there will be one service. Within the 5 years, there would be a service each year. And the only thing they obviously don't cover is misuse. So if they go and identify that the equipment has been misused in any kind of way and they can prove it, then that wouldn't be covered. But when you get the extended warranty of the 5 years, it's a long list of what is covered. But there is a service every year.
So I think, in principle, everyone seems to be agreeing with this, with the caveat that a bit more possibly training with officers in terms of the relevant Consumer Act, to make sure that we are advising residents that it might be a 12-month warranty, but it's a stair lift that's expected to last operate for 10 years, therefore Consumer Act kicks in.
Good, we'll take that away and implement that as necessary. Okay, thank you. Another picture of external step lift installations here at the front of the property and to the side. So the penultimate proposal is landlords. We talked about landlords earlier, Councillor Buckingham. How do we deal with landlord cases and housing association cases? So under the current regime, there is no special provisions for adaptations for tenants that live in social properties or private rents. What we're proposing here is that we streamline those applications for private tenants if their landlord can assist by helping submit the application for them, because the application is a government document. It is time consuming to complete. It does require a lot of information, and we're also asking that landlords can assist us by providing the drawings themselves, doing the survey, putting a specification out for the works, and even carrying out the works if they can organise the contractors. So if the landlord, whether that's a private landlord or a housing association, can assist in the process at the front end, we will ultimately reduce waiting times for those tenants, and officers' time can then be spent on other cases. So we're recommending that officers introduce option A there under the proposal, that we streamline those applications effectively, because currently they're all just sat in the same waiting list.
So effectively they'll be moving along the queue quicker because they've done the work for us.
Correct.
Kind of makes sense.
And it's a saving on our resources as
well.
well.
Yeah, obviously. Everyone happy with that? Surprised that one isn't going on as well, to be honest.
Here's a picture of some kitchen adaptations in a property in Gretton, which was a young chap following a car accident, sadly, that became in a wheelchair, and then we lowered all the services for him in the kitchen, which enabled him to carry on living independently as opposed to having to live in care. So that was a successful case. I've just thrown this...
Sorry, before we carry on, David had got his hand up, and I wasn't sure if it was the last item.
No, it was a late thought. So just as we are effectively allowing a private landlord to undertake part of that process, how will we assure ourselves that all landlords are doing that correctly and not necessarily using the grants to do improvements that perhaps we wouldn't approve under those grant conditions? So it's a little bit of a, how do we satisfy our internal audit that we're...
The surveyor would still be involved like we are. So some people now don't want to use our surveyors, don't want to use our architects, don't want to use our contractors. They want to do it all themselves, but they want us to pay at the end. So there would still be one of NNC surveyors that project manage it at the end and check it all. Building controls sign off certain works anyway. So we wouldn't just give them an open check to do whatever they want. We would still have to approve the drawings, do interim visits, and we would only pay at the end if we've signed it off. So there would be full control there.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just throw this slide in at this stage just to say this isn't anything new. We have to let everyone know about this because
Sorry, can you use your
Sorry.
mic?
Thank you. Complaints, I've had to throw in this slide in at this stage because Foundations advise us within the new policy that we emphasise and highlight the complaints process. I'm pleased to say that we get very few complaints about DFGs, MP complaints, complaints that go through the corporate complaint system. Any complaints that we do get is usually around the length of time it takes to deliver it. But what we're looking to what we're looking to say here is that we're not going to make any changes. If there's anyone that wants to complain, then they'll use the council's stage 1, stage 2 process in addition to receiving any MP complaints or member inquiries that we get. So we're not looking to make any changes there. But what has been recommended by Foundations is that we look to consider an appeals process, but we don't feel that we need to do that here because most of our scheme of works that go out to the applicant are approved, and if they're not approved, then a conversation is had between the surveyor and the residents and the occupational therapist, sometimes the doctor. So the final design scheme is approved by all those parties before we go ahead. So we don't feel we need the need for appeals. So I just needed to highlight that to you, if that makes sense.
David.
Those of you that know me will realise that my ears pricked up about the OT assessments earlier on and the timescale around that. So I've asked a few questions and it sort of comes under complaints bit around it. So I just wanted to check some of the facts that we do have around waiting lists for occupational therapists. So since vesting day, we have had no occupational therapy assessments that have waited for longer than 22 weeks, and that was a low priority assessment. So whilst it may be said that it may have taken 18 months, that's a whole process, not just the occupational therapy assessment. That 22-week one was a very low priority, non-urgent assessment. A DFG application would not take that long. So just to provide members some assurance and some clarity around the timescales that we have currently.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got any comments about the complaints process? No? Not even note 1? I'm surprised. Okay.
The final proposal then, so with all of the works that we've discussed so far today, when the OT submits a recommendation, it is usually quite straightforward. It's for a level access shower, a stair lift, a ground floor bedroom. Sometimes they do ask for additional works that we can design within the scope of the project, things like sensory rooms, safe spaces. Certainly as we're seeing a growing demand with children that have autism, ADHD, developmental delays, etc. Children that need a safe space in the garden, they ask for fences to be erected, somewhere to charge their scooter, treatment rooms. Often these measures don't cost a huge amount of money. So what we're asking for here is when such non-mandatory works come forward within the grants, it's our recommendation that the decisions can be made on those on a case-by-case basis by the DFG manager, with the surveyor and the carer and the OTs, etc., up to a limit of £1,000. Any broader works that go over £1,000, we would go to the independent panel for a decision, because the works that I've listed there are kind of outside the scope of what a mandatory DFG is all about, but they are often very much needed and do provide a lot of added benefit to that disabled child or adult.
Councillor Buckingham.
Sorry, I thought you said Binley.
No.
Yes, this is needed. Again, is it going to be a council-wide thing or just a private thing? Because, you know, I struggle with what our tenants are allowed to have and other people. And I've said this all the way along. It's a two-tier system. If you're in social housing, you know, you're told that you can't have things like this because it's not mandatory. So to give it to one, and I'm making a point here, to give it to one group of people and exclude others, I find I'm not happy with. And you're right, we have to move with the times. You know, MND wasn't heard of so many years ago. Children with special needs now, and understanding those needs. You know, we've got to move with the times, but I want it to be an encompassing thing. Thank you.
I hear what you're saying here. I might need to bring David in a minute, but obviously this policy does cover the private sector. I know we've talked about this over the years about providing DFGs cross-tenure, and there are legal reasons why we can't and how it's funded from the HRA to our capital budget. This policy does provide for owner-occupiers, private tenants and housing associations. David, have you got any comments on how we can address the council tenants with this?
No, I mean, from our perspective, if there is an assessment that says certain equipment is needed or adaptations are needed, then we're expected to fund that through the HRA capital programme, which is absolutely fine. Personally, I think it should be consistent. However, we do have limitations and we don't necessarily have those reserves at this moment in time. But a lot of these are very low cost, so ordinarily I would have thought that it would be something that we could potentially pick up in. So I'm happy to have those discussions with our Assistant Director and see if we can match the non-mandatory works sort of approach to enable us to do that. Because for me, you know, if we can support someone to stay in their current property, their home, then that's most appropriate. I think the other bit which I do need to say is a lot of our properties are very difficult to adapt to the standards which are expected through the assessments because of the sorts of properties that are within our current portfolio. But wherever possible, we will try and support people to remain in their current accommodation.
Which is one of my supplementary questions at the start. So we also have leaseholders who are private. How do we then, you know, because that leaseholders are usually in flats and, you know, you can't do some of that work. And I was living underneath somebody living on the third floor who couldn't get up and down the stairs. And she was a leaseholder, so she was told she couldn't have any adaptations. You know, it's how do you deal with leaseholders? They're private.
I must admit, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any leaseholders. Are you, Alina? I'm not aware of any leaseholders for going back to the Corby days as well that have come through. They're all of the ones that I'm aware of have been owner occupiers. Leaseholders, I don't believe if there's any cases you want to put my way, then I'm happy to look at it and work out a potential solution if we can. But you're talking about the flats in Corby, where the freeholders, the council, then the leaseholders, they own the flats. As far as I'm aware, I'll have to check the legislation. We should be able to help them.
We actually have.
Yeah,
we
done one?
in Corby, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, flats, yes, we have.
Just if you're putting a policy together, which is what you've done.
Yeah, leaseholders don't fall under the HRA, do
Just put a leaseholder, just have that discussion about leaseholders and what we can and what we can't do.
David, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the bit about the communal areas. So if, for example, they were struggling to get downstairs, You probably can't use a DFG in the communal areas, but you can use it within the actual flat. It would probably be my assumption. Have we? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a discussion that we need to have, not necessarily in this. I get the principle is a good one, and we need to, if as much as we can, replicate it out for our council stock. There is a budget for facilities grants within the HRA that's available, and I know the housing teams will work with residents if they have adaptations that we can't do as to whether there's a suitable social housing option to move into a more, it's one of those weird things, move them to a social house so they can get the adaptations done a lot quicker and easier. But it's we all know it's a pain in, it's legislation, unfortunately. Okay, everyone else happy with this one? Excellent. Is that it? Is that all of them? Oh, no.
So that's the end of the proposals. Before this goes to scrutiny in December and then on to 2nd January, because the policy covers other things, this is quick now. This is just to highlight that we're not looking to change anything for home move grants, for those that are aware of those. So this is an alternative to a disabled facilities grants. So this basically, if people can't get their property adapted for whatever reason and they found an alternative place of residence, it's usually the case where someone's moving from a house to a bungalow, we will provide assistance with those moving costs. So we'll provide a maximum grant there of £6,000. We don't use these very often at all, but we feel it's sensible to keep that in because that does help our budget.
Sorry, they can actually have a DFG adaptation at the new property, which is a maximum cost of 5,000, but that's a matter of having evaluated the current property to the new property. So basically it's a more cost-effective solution. So they can still have a DFG in the new property, but it will have to be up to a cost of £5,000.
Councillor Mercer. Thank you. Is the £6,000 an adequate figure today?
Well, I think they said it's hardly used.
It's hardly used. It's designed to not provide for big scopes of works. It's designed to provide maybe a ramp or something like that. It's not designed to provide them with an extension or a level access shower. The purpose of it is that they're moving to a more suitable property. Usually it's a ground floor property so that their current property doesn't need to be adapted. We could consider reviewing that figure, but we feel as it's not used very often, that figure, certainly on the few cases we've done, has met the needs.
Well, the only reason I ask is that with inflation, I would have expected that figure to have risen, that's all.
Okay.
We can consider raising it. I mean, I'm open to that. I mean, that we could raise it to 7.
Okay, have a look at it.
And then finally, this just lists the current other grants we provide outside of DFG now. So we have another pot of money, which is for home repair grants. The current policy, which is largely a legacy from Kettering, East, Wellingborough and Corby, the legacy councils provided renovation grants, landlord renovation grants, home repair assistance grants. With those maximum limits, we're proposing to scrap all of those and replace it with one new home repair grant with a maximum ceiling of £15,000. So this will be for homeowners that are on a means-tested benefit or on a low income, and it's designed to remove hazards from their property to help with insulation measures, replacing condemned boilers, any minor repairs that are needed to improve their safety, replacing sometimes a back door or securing a fence. And then on the odd occasion where we're dealing with empty properties, we look to provide a small grant to help them with immediate repairs if it means they can bring their property back into use. As an add-on there, I am bringing a future empty home strategy to this forum next year, so I don't really want to cover empty homes too much in this policy, but I wanted to capture it now because we do deal with some empty homeowners that urgently need some support in getting their property secure so they can bring it back into use. So the recommendation is that we get rid of all the legacy grants and just have one home repair grant.
Okay. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Following up Councillor Buckingham's comments, this refers to owner-occupied. It probably means it should be owner-occupied and leaseholders.
Yeah, good point.
Okay. Otherwise, kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Everyone happy with that? Okay.
And that's the end. Thank you for listening. Sorry it was so long, but I think it was certainly worth the discussion.
Yeah, it was. We felt it was better to do it in one hit than have 10 separate.
I thought so. It was
argument.
useful to have the
Yeah.
questions after each proposal because there was quite a few changes.
Councillor.
Sorry. Yeah. Just as and you've answered all my questions that I'd got, apart from one. Do you have a named person that will go through options if they need a disabled facility grant? For example, I told you about the lady who couldn't move downstairs, up and downstairs pretty well as a leaseholder. Is there any way that she could have talked to somebody about what her options as a disabled person is on how she can solve her problems in the best way possible? Because, you know, it's not always easy going through the OT, looking to see what can be done with the property. So is there a person like a Housing Options that will go through some of those things that will make life easier?
Certainly, within the Disabled Facilities Grants team, we have surveyors and grant support officers, and I'd like to think between both of them, or through Alina and with occupational therapists as well, that a discussion could be had. I think the first point of inquiry would be for a grant support officer, because the grant support officers are well versed in this policy and what grants are available. They can talk about home move, they can give advice on whether someone wishes to dispose of their property and sell it and move elsewhere, or move from social to private. So I'd start off with the grant support officer in the private sector housing service.
Thank you. And is that within the policy?
We've not explained that as such, no. I mean, obviously we get a range of inquiries through our private sector housing email address, and obviously anything that falls inside or outside of policy, we can offer a discussion, we can offer advice on anyway, but we've not specifically explained that, no, in our policy, no. But whether we need to consider adding it in or not.
It's within the service.
It's within the service as advice, yeah.
I mean, an idea would be, because we have 4 grant support officers and they specifically cover the 4 areas, we could probably list the email that we have and their 4 numbers. So that's open to everyone to decide who to call, yeah? Do you think? Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you, Amy. Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So, next item on the agenda, which I've lost, is the forward plan.
Thank you, Chair. So that's part of your packs as the executive forward plan that covers the period November to February. You will note that November's quite busy for executive. I think it's fluctuated, but I think it's around the sort of 17 reports mark for November, and December is shaping up to be very similar. And then obviously we're into the budget period, so we'll have budget stuff, budget reports, draft budget reports coming to December, and then back again in February before it goes off to council for approval. Following on from that, you've also got the forward plan for this particular EAP. We only have 2 meetings remaining before the elections. The next one is scheduled for the 22nd of January. We've got standard items for that, plus draft economic growth strategy and cultural strategy that may be in a position to come forward for that particular meeting. March is currently blank because there is that meeting may not take place on that date, depending on how things go, because we'll be getting very close to PERDA by that point. And there might not be anything interesting on the executive forward plan for the same reasons, which would mean that there's nothing to come to this particular EAP. but we have definitely at least one more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, then I'll declare this meeting closed. Thank you, everyone.